In the heart of Florida's judicial system, one man stood as a pillar of integrity: Judge Robert Calloway, a name synonymous with fairness, wisdom, and unwavering moral conviction. Over the years, he built not just a career, but a legacy that stretched beyond the courtroom into the tight-knit confines of his family. He was the kind of man whose handshake carried weight, whose decisions shaped lives, and whose presence carried respect. But beneath the surface of this revered figure, a story was unfolding, a story no one dared to imagine. Judge Calloway had it all: a distinguished career, a devoted family, and a reputation most could only dream of. To the outside world, the Calloway household was the epitome of success and stability. Holiday dinners filled with laughter, photographs that told a story of love and accomplishment, and a future that seemed as solid as the gavel in his hand. Yet, as is often the case with those in positions of power, the walls of his carefully constructed life concealed truths that would devastate anyone who peered too closely. It started with whispers, small, inconsequential rumors that no one dared to confront. But soon these whispers began to grow, taking on a life of their own. They hinted at something unspeakable, something that would eventually shake the very foundation of the Calloway family. This was a story of trust shattered in the most unimaginable way, an affair, a betrayal of the deepest kind that would leave a trail of destruction no one could have foreseen. And as the layers of this tale were peeled back, it revealed an unthinkable chain of events. A love triangle that crossed ethical, moral, and familial boundaries. A shocking diagnosis that would expose a hidden danger, and a brutal, bloody ending that would forever stain the Calloway name. Stay with us as we unravel the harrowing truth behind the story of Judge Robert Calloway, a man whose choices would lead to betrayal, heartbreak, and murder. Judge Robert Calloway was a man whose very presence commanded respect. Sitting atop the bench of one of Florida's most esteemed courtrooms, his rulings shaped lives, and his name became synonymous with fairness and justice. For over 3 decades, he presided over some of the most challenging cases in the state, earning accolades from colleagues and unwavering admiration from his community. Outside the courtroom, Judge Calloway was known as a family man, a proud father, a doting husband, and a grandfather-to-be. At the heart of his life was his son Daniel, a soft-spoken and dependable young man who had recently married the love of his life, Claire. Claire was everything the Calloway family could have hoped for: bright, charming, and now carrying the future of the Calloway lineage. The announcement of Claire's pregnancy had brought newfound joy to the family, and preparations for the baby's arrival were already in full swing. From preparations to the day of the wedding, Claire had already devoted herself to living up. Baby showers were planned, a nursery was being decorated, and in their quiet suburban neighborhood, the Calloways appeared to be living a dream that many envied. But dreams, as they often do, can mask deeper realities. Claire's relationship with her father-in-law was by all accounts warm. She often spoke of him with admiration, marveling at his accomplishments and the wisdom he shared. Judge Calloway, in turn, seemed to take a special interest in Claire, offering advice and showing concern for her well-being during the early stages of her pregnancy. Family gatherings were filled with laughter, stories, and the kind of closeness that suggested all was well. Yet, there was something unspoken in the way they interacted, a certain intensity that, at first, seemed innocuous. Friends and family would later recall how the judge's eyes lingered on Claire during conversations, how he was unusually attentive when she spoke, and how his presence seemed to draw her in. It wasn't enough to raise alarm, but it was there, quietly threading itself into the fabric of their lives. Daniel, oblivious to the subtle changes, was focused on building a future for his growing family. He worked tirelessly, eager to provide for Claire and their unborn child. Meanwhile, Claire spent her days preparing for motherhood, leaning on her father-in-law for guidance and support in Daniel's absence. Their bond, though outwardly innocent, began to take on a life of its own, one that would test the limits of trust, loyalty, and family. What seemed like a close-knit family, bound by love and shared dreams, was in fact balancing on a razor's edge. Unbeknownst to anyone, choices were being made, lines were being crossed, and a betrayal was taking root that would leave no one untouched. For months their bond had appeared harmless, a father-in-law offering guidance to his son's young wife, who was navigating the uncharted waters of pregnancy and new family dynamics. The conversations between Judge Robert Calloway and Claire were often private, but they were explained away as nothing more than his concern for her well-being. After all, Judge Calloway was known for his thoughtful nature, and Claire was now carrying his first grandchild. But proximity has a way of blurring boundaries, and trust, once taken for granted, can become a dangerous weapon. It started with small moments that in retrospect should have raised questions. A lingering glance, a compliment that felt just a little too personal, an innocent touch that lingered just a beat too long. Claire, feeling isolated as her husband Daniel worked long hours, began leaning on Robert in ways that extended beyond the familial. Robert, for reasons only he could explain, allowed himself to cross a line that should never have been blurred. What began as shared confidences, Claire confiding in Robert about her fears as a new mother, Robert sharing anecdotes of his own early days as a parent, soon escalated into something far more personal. Their late-night conversations became more frequent, their exchanges more intimate. The power dynamic between an experienced judge and a young, impressionable woman created a connection that was as unbalanced as it was undeniable. And then, it happened. A choice was made that could never be undone. Now go for it. For Claire, it may have been a moment of vulnerability. For Robert, perhaps it was arrogance, the belief that he was untouchable, even within his own family. But regardless of how it began, the affair shattered the very foundation upon which the Calloway family had been built. When Daniel discovered the truth, it was not through confrontation, but through quiet observation. A misplaced message on Claire's phone, a glance between his wife and his father that carried an unspoken weight. A conversation he wasn't meant to overhear. Piece by piece, Daniel began to unravel the betrayal. And when he finally confronted Claire, the weight of the truth was enough to crush everything he believed in. This wasn't just infidelity. This was something far deeper, more personal. His own father, the man he had looked up to his entire life, had crossed the one line Daniel never thought possible. The devastation was total, the betrayal, absolute. But the worst was yet to come, because the affair was just the beginning, a spark that would ignite a chain of events leading to something far more tragic, something no one in the Calloway family could have anticipated. It was a cold, quiet evening when the confrontation finally erupted. A moment months in the making, where secrets, guilt, and anger could no longer be contained. For Daniel Calloway, it wasn't just about betrayal. This was his family, his wife, the mother of his unborn child, and his father, the man who had always been his guiding light. The pain of their betrayal cut deeper than any wound, and Daniel knew he couldn't hold it in any longer. The night began innocently enough. A family dinner was planned, and everyone was seated at the table, pretending to go about their lives as if everything was normal. But for Daniel, the weight of what he knew was unbearable. Every glance between Claire and Robert felt like another slap to his face. Every word spoken in Robert's calm, measured tone only fueled the fire that had been burning in Daniel's chest for weeks. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, Daniel stood up. The room went silent as he placed both hands on the table, his voice shaking as he addressed his father. "How long?" he asked. Claire's face went pale, and Robert froze, his eyes darting toward his son. Daniel repeated himself, louder this time. "How long, Dad?" The silence that followed was deafening. Claire looked at Robert, pleading with her eyes for him to say something, anything, that could diffuse the situation. But there were no words that could save them. When Robert finally spoke, it was as though he was pleading for control. "Daniel, let's step outside. Let's talk about this." But Daniel didn't move. His emotions boiled over, spilling into a torrent of accusations, shouting, and anger. The facade of civility crumbled in an instant. Claire tried to interject, but her voice was drowned out by Daniel's rage. The argument escalated rapidly, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. And then, in the chaos, came the moment no one could have foreseen. Some say it was an accident. Others believe it was the culmination of everything that had been festering beneath the surface. What is certain is that the altercation turned physical. Robert, trying to calm his son, made a move toward him, but Daniel pushed back. In the melee, voices were raised, furniture was upended, and the unthinkable happened. When it was over, Claire stood in the corner, frozen in shock, her hands trembling as she clutched her stomach. Robert was on the floor, unmoving, and Daniel stood over him, breathing heavily, his eyes wide with disbelief at what he had just done. Ick. And the breathing got worse, and the thing he was looking at grew dizzier, and the motion fainter, and the breathing became harder. The scene that followed was chaotic. Claire screaming, neighbors peering through windows, and eventually the wail of sirens cutting through the night. The Calloway home, once a picture of stability and success, was now a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape and flooded with the red and blue lights of police cars. But the tragedy didn't end there. As investigators pieced together the events of that night, they uncovered something that left even the most seasoned detectives questioning everything they thought they knew about the case. What they found was far more than just a family torn apart by betrayal. It was something that would unravel the fabric of the Calloway family even further, leaving behind more questions than answers. After a while, the Calloway family left its ranches behind and moved in several different directions, potentially conflicting with their own real life. What was discovered behind those closed doors would shock a nation, and the story of the Calloway family would become a cautionary tale of trust, betrayal, and the deadly consequences of secrets left to fester. As the Calloway family's tragic story began to unravel, one question loomed large. How could a family once held together by love and respect fall apart so catastrophically? If you've been gripped by this story so far, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most jaw-dropping true crime tales, and this one is far from over. And, the aftermath of Robert Calloway's death sent shockwaves through the local community. Friends and colleagues who once admired him were left reeling, searching for answers in a case that seemed too personal, too shocking to comprehend. What do you think was the true motive behind this tragedy? Was it an accident, or was there something deeper at play? Let us know in the comments below before we reveal the next twist in this gripping case. As the investigation came to a close, and the pieces of this tragic puzzle were laid bare, one truth became inescapably clear. This wasn't just a story about betrayal or violence. It was a story about choices. Choices made in anger, in secrecy, and in desperation. Choices that unraveled a family and shattered lives forever. For many who knew the Calloway family, the aftermath of this tragedy was a time of soul-searching. How could such a respected man, a pillar of his community, find himself at the center of such a devastating series of events? Was it pride that led him to confront his son and daughter-in-law? Was it love that blinded him to the cracks forming in his family? Or was it something far more complicated? Stories like this leave us with questions that linger long after the headlines fade. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Were there moments, small and fleeting, where someone could have stepped in to stop the chain of events before it was too late? We may never know. But what this story teaches us is that trust, once broken, can lead to consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. As you sit with this story, ask yourself, how do we respond when faced with betrayal? Do we confront it head-on, risking everything in the heat of emotion? Or do we seek understanding, even when our hearts are breaking? These are the questions that define not just the Calloway family's tragedy, but so many moments of conflict in our own lives. The Calloway case is more than a headline. It's a mirror reflecting the fragility of relationships, the danger of unspoken truths, and the devastating power of unchecked emotions. And as we close this chapter, we leave you with this. How would you have handled the choices faced by this family? Would you have acted differently? Or, like them, would you have been caught in a storm you never saw coming? The courtroom was silent, save for the faint shuffle of papers and the weighty breaths of those awaiting the judge's words. Months of grueling testimony, evidence laid bare, and lives dissected had led to this moment. The stakes could not have been higher, and the tension in the room was palpable. On one side sat the Calloway family, fragmented and grieving, their faces etched with the agony of betrayal and loss. On the other side, the defendant, once a symbol of justice, now a man broken by his own actions. The gavel struck sharply, and the room held its breath. As the verdict was read aloud, the atmosphere seemed to shift, a culmination of anger, heartbreak, and resolution colliding in a single moment. Guilty. The word reverberated through the courtroom, echoing in the ears of everyone present. A respected judge, a man who had once sentenced others, now faced the cold reality of his own judgment: life in prison. The sentence was as severe as the crime, and yet it did little to ease the pain of those left behind. In the gallery, the judge's son, his face pale and unreadable, sat motionless. He had lost a father, a wife, and the life he once knew, all in the span of a single act of violence. Nearby, his sister sobbed quietly, clutching a handkerchief as though it could somehow absorb the enormity of what had happened. The courtroom, so often a place of justice and resolution, felt like a hollow echo of what it was meant to be: a stage for broken lives and unanswered questions. Testimonies from the trial revealed the depth of the affair and the volatile emotions that led to the confrontation. Witness after witness painted a picture of a family imploding under the weight of secrets and mistrust. Prosecutors argued that the judge had acted out of desperation, unable to reconcile his dual roles as a father and an arbiter of the law. The defense sought leniency, citing a lifetime of service and a momentary lapse in judgment, but the evidence was irrefutable, and the jury's decision was unanimous. As the judge was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom watched in stunned silence. This was a man who had spent his life upholding the law, now bound by it in the most personal way imaginable. The clang of the prison gates closing behind him was a sound that many said they would never forget, a stark reminder of the thin line between justice and tragedy. But the emotional fallout didn't end in the courtroom. For the Calloway family, the trial was just one step in a long journey toward healing. Friends and colleagues who once admired the judge now grappled with the duality of his character. Was he a victim of circumstance, or was he always capable of such an act? For his son, the pain was immeasurable, an unfathomable betrayal by the two people he trusted most. And for the community, the trial left an indelible mark, a cautionary tale of how even the strongest foundations can crumble under the weight of human frailty. In the wake of such a tragedy, it's impossible not to ask, how could it all have come to this? The betrayal, the murder, the shattered lives. These were not just the consequences of a single devastating act. They were the culmination of years of trust, broken by the very people who were supposed to protect it. A judge sworn to uphold justice, now condemned for violating the one sacred bond he held closest: family. The pain was not just felt by the immediate family members, but by an entire community that had once looked up to the man who now stood behind bars. His son, once proud of his father's accomplishments, could no longer recognize the man before him. His wife, who had betrayed him in the most intimate way, now had to live with the haunting reality of her actions. And the judge himself, a man who had sentenced countless criminals, now faced the grim reality of being on the other side of the law, forever defined by his own crime. This tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of misplaced trust, the fragility of relationships, and the devastating consequences that can follow when those bonds are violated. What happens when the person you trust the most shatters your world? How do you reconcile the person you thought you knew with the person who has become a stranger? These questions linger long after the trial ends, the gavel falls, and the dust settles. For the Calloway family, the road to healing was long and uncertain. The pieces of their broken lives would never fully come together, no matter the verdict or the passage of time. The father, the son, the wife, each left to grapple with the wreckage of their choices, unable to undo the irreversible damage done. In the end, no one walks away from a tragedy like this unscathed. And so, as we reflect on this story, we must ask ourselves, what price do we pay when trust is betrayed? What lengths are we willing to go to in order to preserve the bonds that hold us together? The answers are far from clear, and the impact of such events ripples through our lives in ways we may never fully understand. We know it is a ripple affecting everything about our lives, including the trustworthiness we put in others and the trustworthiness we feel in ourselves. So, I ask you, what would you do if someone you trusted shattered your world? Could you find a way to forgive? Could you ever move forward, knowing that betrayal lies at the heart of it all? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story has left you speechless, you're not alone. The truth behind this family's tragic unraveling is something that will stay with you long after the video ends. But there are countless more stories out there, stories that will make you question everything you think you know about trust, betrayal, and the human heart. If you want to uncover more true crime tales that reveal the darkest secrets, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. And while you're at it, make sure you click the bell icon so you never miss an update. We're bringing you new, spine-chilling stories that are guaranteed to keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what's coming next. But we also want to hear from you. What do you think about this case? What do you believe drove the judge to such lengths? Was there something that could have stopped it before it became a tragedy? Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation. Your voice matters in these stories, and we want to hear from you.